But I really loved the 3-word chunk that Roland gave just a little while ago, and I really want to invite you to imagine. This one is going to be heavy, heavy doses of imagination. Speaking of, when you think of the Edwards Plateau, historical, pristine conditions, maybe pictures like this, or this. People recognizing where these are? No, because they're fake. They're all AI. They're all AI. Well, why in the world would I do that? It's very intentional because of things like this. What we see, even in a natural state, is a lot more complex and nuanced than meets the eye. It was a practice of the pioneers to turn as many cows, sheep, and goats as they could acquire, loose in the prairies, and reap the gain and offsprings of the prolific semi-wild herds. In South Texas, the missions pioneered by introducing the Spanish open ranching system, full-blown, and the herds were prodigious. By the 1760s, 5 mission ranches in the San Antonio area were working a total of more than 5,000 cattle and 17,000 sheep and goats. That sounds small, localized, but this was early, and this was very much, compared to the people, a big number of animals. So really, if you want to think about what a pristine, historic Edwards Plateau would look like, you have to go a little bit earlier. Maybe like this. I also did not take these pictures with a camera. But clearly, the story of the Edwards Plateau, all of Texas and everywhere, is one of change. Sometimes we perceive it, sometimes we very much play a very active role. Sometimes it's a little bit more nuanced. You have to take a longer time span to really understand what's going on. And we see some of this change in things like tree cover. Here's an image, remote sensing derived from about 1987. And here's a little bit more recent in time. Here. Now, there might be some methodological conversations we can have, but you can see that things do shift a little bit. I actually perceive the fires in the Lost Pines area back in 2011, 2012, that changed some things. So what we see in terms of our vegetation can change. Well, that is not the only thing that becomes a little bit different than maybe what we're accustomed to. From the National Climate Assessment, the 5th version that came out at this point a couple of years ago, if we look at what some of the projected changes, these aren't predicted, it's what could happen. It's kind of a choose your own adventure to some extent. Well, we see where we're at. The average changes are maybe a little bit murky, but maybe towards the drier side. If we're really lucky, maybe a little bit more precipitation. That's what 20% of the models that go into this. And the driest 20% of models don't paint a super happy picture about how much rain is going to be falling from the sky. Say, oh, okay, predictions. It's hard to see in this national map. Well, if we kind of dial into our neck of the woods a little bit closer, this intermediate scenario, that's not as bad, maybe not as much carbon in the air. This is lots and lots of carbon in the air. There's a lot of brown in those pictures for this part of the state. Maybe there's a little bit of green that could be wishy-washy, from season to season. The total trend in precipitation is towards the, what I'll call, crispier, crunchier side of things. Well, it's not just the rain falling from the sky, it's also the rain that's floating up from below our feet. This is a look at where actual evapotranspiration could be. And that's the combination of evaporation from surfaces, but also water breathed out by plants. And hey, we don't have as much evaporation and transpiration. It's because there's not going to be maybe as much water to actually be around to evaporate and transpire. Again, it's not, I hear people all the time, there is never an average year of rainfall in Texas. Because we go, I'm from the southeast part of the state, well, I live in the southeast part of the state, where we've had years, about 20 inches of rain, and then we've had years that approach 70. So there's a giant span, And our ability to kind of roll those into projections can vary, but even in the best of conditions, not a whole lot of change, but if we again get towards the drier side of where things could head, we're looking at a lot of missing water. This also translates not just what's in the soil, what's in the rocks, but what's running off that we depend on for our drinking water supplies, for aquatic resources in terms of biology and ecosystems, not just in the streams, but all the way down to the bay as well. This one's a little bit fuzzy, kind of interesting. The average is maybe slightly damper, maybe probably imperceptibly. But again, a little bit of change from where we are now. Now, some of that maybe is due to overall really intense bursts of rain that maybe drop a lot more. So it runs off rather than interspersed, smaller, more what we're used to rainfalls. Who knows? Again, we're talking about projections of what could be possible here. This one, to me, might be one of the most important ones that we look at. This is the change in soil moisture. So even though we just looked at what could be annual runoff, maybe actually getting slightly damper, potentially, barely. The soil moisture story through the summer months, June to August, is pretty telling. The average shows not just the Edwards Plateau, not just the south central US, not just the Rockies and the Cascades, a whole lot of drier soil just about everywhere. And in those lucky years where we're drier than normal, that's a lot of crispy, crunchy, gappy soils. That's going to be some thirsty, thirsty ground. And this is, again, mid-century. We're pretty close to mid-century, believe it or not. Well, if we roll all these together, talked about incoming water resources, outgoing water resources, what does that mean in terms of lost water or how much we're missing, a water deficit, if you will? Congratulations, South Texas, you are the winners. You get the brownest of the brown in terms of the average projected potential conditions. That's 2 to 3 inches on average that we're going to be missing. But again, in those driest potential conditions, by far, this will be the area of the United States that is losing the most amount of water compared to what we're used to. And we're not starting from a rainforest or a wet mountain condition in the eastern United States. We're already borderline desert. And we're going to push harder towards the dry side, drier, crispy soils. Like, okay, these are projections, feels bad, I'm scared, I don't like it. Shove it aside, okay. And at the same time, this story came out a couple months ago, we're already kind of blowing some of these projections away. Surprising, actually, some of the people that put them together. So what does this all mean? And this isn't just what might happen a few decades ago. Right now, we're already jumping past some of where we thought these milestones were going to be. A few years ago, contributed a little bit to Office of the State Climatologist report looking at where we've been extreme-wise in terms of Texas weather, where we might be headed. And some of this we've already seen incrementally, even though we might miss it. Over the long term, precipitation trends. And this is, again, long term. So we're talking, is that 130 years? Where, generally, the West has slowly been getting drier. The East has been slowly getting wetter. And this is in terms of precipitation. Again, not things that are evaporating out or being breathed out by plants. And again, these aren't huge numbers. 2%, 1%. But if you're applying that over 12, 13 decades, those numbers do start to build up. And you can start to get a real impact on what the land looks and feels and behaves like. But again, it's not just the water story, it's also what's being applied to that soil and that water. If you look statewide, generally kind of breaking up into geographic regions from the same report, the number of 100-degree days. Y'all don't have any of these around here. You have a lot, and you've been getting more. A couple years ago, welcomed our second to the world. And in the summer of 2023, it was too hot to go to the pool. That told me something. And it was very disappointing and really resulted in a much higher air conditioning bill because I had to stay home and entertain people that way. And this is going to become more and more common. We've already seen this trend. We have lived it. We sometimes see it on the news. Sometimes when you go outside, you feel it from year to year. But it's not just the hot stuff. It's also the gaps between when it actually does rain. I took the liberty just a couple days ago of pulling this. This is San Antonio International Airport, really close to where I stayed last night. The longest rain-free stretches all the way back to 1942. It's about 80 years. These are since 2006, which is interesting because statistically that should not be that heavy loaded with really recent data. And I actually think, got a bone to pick with this one up here. So the thing that reset your clock here last year was because a couple drops fell right on the rain gauge at the airport. So it's not like it actually rained, but it just pushed hard enough on that lever to say, it's over. I actually believe that it should have plowed beyond that and actually should be the number one. Bone to pick. And it's not just a couple of stretches of days. Over the last 3 years, previous 3 years, you're essentially down over the southern Edwards Plateau a whole year of rainfall. It just didn't happen. That's what happens when you stack up a bunch of rain-free stretches. Or heck, even if you break it into a bunch of stretches, but it only rains a little bit from time to time. We are experiencing very different conditions from our baseline. And that baseline is continuing to shift. As a result, all these things kind of folded together, we have an acceleration of the water cycle. When it does rain, maybe it rains heavier. When it stops raining, it evaporates and transpires faster. This is a few years ago. The methodology is super complex. But overall, it shows you that things are going at different rates than what we've been accustomed to. And that means we're going to have to get used to it. But it's not just us. Say, okay, you know, this is fine. We'll be fine. Plants around us are still green. And maybe they can be. There's actually an interesting piece that came out a couple months ago that trees remember wetter times. So those that are older maybe are kind of hearkening back to that, what they used to have. But the younger ones, they're more robust because they've only known dry conditions. Or what I like to say, it's better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all. Whereas trees say, maybe I actually am better off if I never had that love. I'm not pining for it all the time. If you look about it, or if you look at what we've seen globally, here's an interesting piece that came out relatively recently of where die-offs of plant communities have been studied. Whoops, got the numbers on that one. Whoop. Okay, so this one I want you to look right here. That's where you are from the year 1981 to 2010. That was your climate normal. That red star. Well, if you shift it to 2020, or 1990 to 2020, you're actually pretty close. Maybe got ever so slightly warmer, but it also got ever so slightly wetter. And again, these are all where plant die-offs have been studied in different biomes, different colors, warmer here, cooler here, wetter here. So of course, a green, deep, deep green is going to be a tropical rainforest. This is desert. This one is interesting. It kind of breaks up the climate normal. From the year 2000 to 2006 to 2020. So we've gone 1980 to 2010. We've got 1990 to 2020. But if you look at 2006 to 2020, so just the more recent years, this is the jump that you take. You're starting to plow towards our desert type of landscape. And we were already kind of marginally here in this seasonal forest savanna. But it's not going to take a whole lot, just a little warmer or just a little drier, to be what most of the rest of the world considers to be a subtropical desert. We're already on the margins. The end. And I'll leave the second part for after lunch.